Stop the wedding. The woman's voice cut through the ballroom so sharply that even the string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of Manhattan's elite guests, but suddenly the entire room felt frozen in place. Ethan Cole slowly turned toward the entrance of the cathedral-sized ballroom, his hand still inches away from Vanessa Hale's. For one terrifying second, the billionaire forgot how to breathe, because standing beneath the towering gold doors was his wife, Claire. A wave of whispers exploded through the crowd. Some guests looked confused. Others looked genuinely frightened. After all, 18 months ago, every major newspaper in America had reported the same thing. Claire Bennett Cole was dead. Ethan stared at her like he was seeing a ghost walk out of the ocean. Claire's dark wool coat was damp from the February rain outside. Strands of blonde hair clung to her face. Her eyes were glossy with fury and heartbreak at the same time. She looked thinner than he remembered, paler, but unmistakably alive. Vanessa's grip tightened around Ethan's arm. "Ethan," she whispered nervously, but he barely heard her. Claire began walking down the aisle slowly, the sound of her heels echoing across the marble floor. Every guest turned to follow her. Billionaires, politicians, reporters. None of them dared speak. Ethan's chest tightened harder with every step she took. The last time he had seen Claire was on a rainy night off the coast of Italy. One phone call, one yacht accident, one body never recovered, and then 18 months of grief that nearly destroyed him. Claire finally stopped inches in front of him. Ethan could see her trembling now, not with fear, with emotion she had clearly been holding inside for far too long. Her voice cracked softly. "You were really going to marry her?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Claire looked down briefly and noticed something that made her expression shatter even more. Ethan was still wearing his wedding ring, the same platinum band she had placed on his finger 6 years ago in Napa Valley beneath white roses and candlelight. A single tear slid down her cheek before. She quickly wiped it away. Then suddenly, Claire lifted her hand and slapped him across the face. The sound wasn't violent. It wasn't explosive, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it felt devastating. Gasps spread instantly through the crowd. Vanessa stepped backward in shock. Several reporters immediately raised their phones. Ethan didn't react. He didn't touch his face, didn't look angry. If anything, he looked broken. Claire's voice shook as she stared directly into his eyes. "I buried you every single night in my head," she whispered. "And somehow you buried me faster." Ethan's throat tightened painfully. "Claire," her eyes filled again. "Don't say my name like you mourn me." The rain outside pounded harder against the cathedral windows while guests stood frozen in disbelief. Ethan still couldn't fully process what he was seeing. Her voice, her face, her breathing. Alive. God, she was alive. Vanessa finally stepped forward carefully, trying to regain control of the room. "Security," she said tightly. "Please remove this woman." But before anyone could move, Ethan suddenly spoke for the first time. Quietly, hoarsely, "Nobody touches my wife." The ballroom erupted into stunned whispers all over again. And Claire's expression shifted instantly, because for the first time since walking into that room, she realized Ethan might not have betrayed her after all. The ballroom no longer sounded like a wedding. It sounded like panic wrapped in whispers. Guests leaned toward each other in disbelief while camera flashes flickered across the gold walls like lightning. Ethan could barely hear any of it. His entire world had narrowed to Claire standing in front of him breathing hard, rainwater still dripping from the edge of her coat onto the marble floor. Alive. After 18 months of grief, funerals, condolences, and endless nights staring at the empty side of his bed, she was standing 3 feet away from him looking at him like he had destroyed her life. Vanessa tried forcing a composed smile, but her voice trembled slightly. "Claire, this is not the time or place for whatever this performance is." Claire slowly turned toward her, eyes cold. "Performance?" she repeated quietly. "You announced my husband's new wedding while I was still trying to figure out why I was buried alive." The room exploded with louder whispers. Ethan's heartbeat slammed painfully inside his chest. "Claire," he said again carefully, stepping closer. "What are you talking about?" For a moment her expression cracked. Hurt flashed across her face so quickly it almost disappeared. "You really do not know?" she whispered. Ethan stared at her in confusion. "Know what?" Claire let out a shaky breath and reached into her bag with trembling fingers. Several security guards moved nervously nearby, unsure whether to intervene. But Ethan lifted one hand immediately, stopping them without taking his eyes off her. Claire pulled out a folded stack of papers worn from travel and moisture. Medical records, foreign hospital forms, death certificates. Ethan frowned as she shoved them against his chest. "Read the date," she said. His fingers tightened around the papers automatically. Italy, Sardinia Medical Center. Ethan's stomach twisted violently. Claire swallowed hard before continuing. "The yacht accident never killed me." Silence. Even the reporters stopped moving. Claire's voice became quieter now, more fragile. "I survived, Ethan. Barely. I woke up 3 weeks later in a private recovery facility outside Florence." Ethan looked up sharply. 3 weeks. Claire nodded slowly, tears gathering again. "I had a head injury. Broken ribs. They kept me heavily medicated for months." Her eyes searched his face desperately, almost begging him to understand. "And every single day they told me the same thing." Ethan felt sick already before hearing it. Claire's voice cracked completely this time. "They told me you never came." Ethan looked genuinely shattered. "Claire, I searched for you for months." She froze. "What?" "I hired rescue teams." His voice turned rough with emotion. "I flew to Italy myself. They told me there were no survivors." Claire stared at him silently, confusion slowly replacing anger. Ethan stepped even closer now, lowering his voice. "I saw your death certificate." Her breathing became uneven. "They showed me divorce papers." Ethan's face lost. "All color." "What divorce papers?" Claire shook her head slowly like her mind could no longer process reality. "They told me you wanted out before the accident, that you were already with someone else." Vanessa suddenly stiffened beside them. Ethan noticed it instantly. His eyes shifted toward her for the first time since Claire entered the ballroom. Vanessa forced a laugh that sounded painfully unnatural. "Ethan, this woman is clearly confused. She has been through trauma." But Claire interrupted her immediately. "Do not." Her voice turned razor sharp. "Do not pretend you do not know exactly what happened." The ballroom fell silent again. Ethan looked between the two women slowly, his chest tightening harder by the second. Because for the very first time that night, he realized something horrifying. Claire was not looking at Vanessa like a stranger. She was looking at her like someone she had seen before. Vanessa's face remained perfectly composed for only a second longer. Then Ethan saw it. Panic. Tiny. Almost invisible. But enough. Claire noticed it too. Her eyes narrowed as she stepped closer to Vanessa beneath the glittering ballroom lights. "You remember me now, do not you?" Claire asked quietly. Vanessa forced a cold smile. "I have no idea what kind of game you were trying to play." "Game?" Claire laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I spent 18 months trapped in another country while people convinced me my husband abandoned me. Someone paid doctors to isolate me. Someone intercepted every message I tried sending home." Ethan felt his pulse pounding harder with every word. Claire slowly turned back toward him. "And the first face I saw after waking up from surgery," her voice trembled slightly, "was hers." Ethan looked sharply toward Vanessa again. "That is impossible." Vanessa immediately stepped forward. "Ethan, listen to yourself. She suffered a traumatic brain injury. She is confused and emotional." Claire reached into her bag once more and pulled out an old photograph with bent edges. She held it up toward Ethan with shaking fingers. "Then explain this." Ethan took the photo slowly. His stomach dropped instantly. The picture showed Claire sitting in a hospital bed in Italy looking pale and exhausted. Standing beside her, smiling at the camera, was Vanessa. The date stamped in the corner read 14 months earlier. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. Vanessa, his fiancée, immediately shook her head. "I can explain." But Ethan barely heard her anymore. His mind was already unraveling backward through the last year and a half. The rushed business merger. Vanessa suddenly appearing beside him during the worst period of his life. Her father offering financial protection when coal holdings nearly collapsed after the European scandal. Her constant insistence that moving on was healthy. God. Ethan felt physically sick. Claire watched his face carefully and realized something equally heartbreaking. He truly had not known. The anger in her eyes began mixing with confusion and grief. "You search for me?" she whispered. Ethan looked at her slowly, almost wounded by the question itself. "Every day." His voice cracked under the weight of it. "I stopped sleeping, Claire." The ballroom around them faded into meaningless noise. Ethan swallowed hard. I hired private investigators in 3 countries. I bribed harbor officials. I kept thinking maybe someone made a mistake. Claire stared at him silently as tears gathered in her eyes again. But they told me. Ethan interrupted softly. Who told you? Claire hesitated. Doctors, lawyers, nurses. Then her expression darkened again as she looked toward Vanessa. And her. Vanessa's breathing became uneven now. Ethan, this is insane. You cannot seriously believe this woman after she disappears for almost 2 years and suddenly crashes our wedding. Claire laughed bitterly. Our wedding? She glanced down at the massive diamond ring on Vanessa's finger. You planned your future while I was learning how to walk again. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. That sentence hit him harder than the slap ever could. Claire noticed the reaction instantly. Beneath all the anger and confusion standing in front of her, Ethan still loved her. The realization scared her almost as much as it hurt. Ethan opened his eyes again and looked at Claire carefully, like he was afraid. She might disappear if he blinked too long. Why did you come tonight? He asked quietly. Claire's lips parted slightly, emotion flickering across her face. Then she looked at Vanessa one more time before answering. Because yesterday, her voice dropped almost to a whisper. I finally found the letters I wrote to you. Ethan frowned in confusion. Letters? Claire nodded slowly. 217 of them. Silence crashed over Ethan's world all over again. And suddenly Vanessa looked terrified. The silence inside the ballroom felt unbearable now. Ethan stood motionless with the photograph still in one hand and Claire's damp medical documents in the other. Across from him, Vanessa looked like someone watching her entire future collapse in slow motion. Claire took a shaky breath before speaking again. I wrote to you every single week. Her eyes remained locked on Ethan's. Birthdays, Christmas, our anniversary, the day I learned to walk without assistance again. Ethan felt his chest tighten harder with every word. I kept believing you would come for me eventually. Claire swallowed painfully. Even after they told me you moved on. Ethan shook his head immediately. I never got any letters. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward, voice sharp with desperation. Ethan, enough. This woman is manipulating you emotionally because she knows exactly who you are. Claire laughed softly through tears. Who he is? She looked back at Ethan. I knew who he was before the money, Vanessa. That sentence landed like a knife in the center of the room. Ethan remembered it instantly. 6 years earlier, before the billion-dollar acquisitions and magazine covers, Claire had met him in a tiny art cafe in Brooklyn while he was still rebuilding Cole Holdings after his father's death. She had fallen in love with the exhausted man eating cold soup at midnight, not the billionaire the world later created. Vanessa saw the look in Ethan's eyes and panic spread deeper across her face. You are making a mistake, she whispered. But Ethan barely heard her now. His attention stayed completely fixed on Claire. What letters? He asked quietly. Claire slowly opened her bag again. This time she pulled out a small bundle of envelopes tied together with faded blue ribbon. The edges were worn. Some were stained with water. Others looked like they had been opened and resealed. Ethan stared at them in disbelief. Every envelope had his name written in Claire's handwriting. The same handwriting from the notes she used to leave beside his coffee every morning. Ethan reached for the bundle slowly, almost afraid to touch it. Claire hesitated for one painful second before finally placing the letters into his hands. I found them yesterday, she whispered, in an abandoned storage office connected to Hale International. Vanessa's face drained completely of color. Ethan noticed immediately. Vanessa, his voice turned colder now. Dangerous in a way Claire had not heard in years. Vanessa shook her head quickly. You do not understand. Then explain. Ethan's tone was calm, but somehow that made it worse. Vanessa glanced around the ballroom nervously. Reporters were openly recording now. Guests whispered behind raised champagne glasses. Her father, Richard Hale, stood near the front table looking furious but strangely nervous himself. Claire looked toward him slowly. Your father visited me twice in Italy. Ethan's eyes snapped toward Richard instantly. Claire continued carefully. He told me Cole Holdings was collapsing. He said Ethan blamed me for distracting him before the accident. Ethan felt sick hearing it. Claire's voice softened again. I believed him because every letter I sent disappeared. Ethan looked down at the envelopes in his trembling hands. 217 chances to find her. 217 chances stolen from both of them. He suddenly noticed something else. None of the envelopes had postal markings. They had never been mailed at all. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward Vanessa again. You intercepted them. Vanessa's breathing became uneven. I was trying to protect you. Claire looked genuinely stunned by the answer. Protect him? Vanessa's composure finally cracked. Tears filled her eyes as years of obsession spilled into her voice. You disappeared and destroyed him. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. I was the one who stayed. Ethan stared at her silently. But Vanessa's next words froze Claire completely. You should have stayed dead. The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing after Vanessa's words. Even the reporters lowered their phones for a second, stunned by what they had just heard. Claire stood frozen beneath the chandelier light, her face pale with disbelief. Ethan looked at Vanessa slowly, like he no longer recognized the woman standing beside him. What did you just say? His voice was quiet now, controlled. But Claire remembered that tone. It was the voice Ethan used right before something inside him snapped completely. Vanessa realized it too. Her expression shifted instantly from anger to panic. Ethan, that is not what I meant. But Ethan did not move. Then explain it correctly. Rain hammered against the tall cathedral windows while guests exchanged nervous looks around the room. Richard Hale suddenly stepped forward from the crowd, forcing a tight smile. This has gone far enough. His polished voice cut sharply through the tension. Claire clearly needs medical attention after everything she has been through. Claire turned toward him immediately. Do not speak to me like I am unstable. Richard's expression hardened slightly. Young lady, you interrupted a private ceremony with accusations and emotional theatrics. Ethan finally looked at him directly. Did you visit Claire in Italy? Richard hesitated 1 second too long. That was all Ethan needed. The billionaire's jaw tightened hard enough to make the muscles in his face visibly shift. Claire slowly reached into her coat pocket again. I knew nobody would believe me without proof. She pulled out her phone and opened a scanned document. Then she handed it silently to Ethan. Ethan stared at the screen while his entire body went cold. It was a payment authorization from Hale International. Large transfers wired monthly to the Italian recovery facility where Claire had been isolated. 18 months of payments. 18 months of silence purchased like a business arrangement. Ethan looked up slowly. You paid them to keep her there. Richard immediately scoffed. That document proves nothing. But Ethan was already seeing the truth everywhere now. Every delayed investigation. Every missing report. Every moment Vanessa conveniently appeared beside him during the darkest year of his life. Claire watched Ethan carefully and realized something painful. The man standing in front of her was not cruel. He had been manipulated almost as deeply as she had. Vanessa stepped closer desperately. Ethan, please listen to me. Tears streamed down her face now, ruining the perfect makeup prepared for the wedding. I did love you. Ethan looked at her with complete emptiness. Love? He repeated quietly. Vanessa nodded frantically. You were falling apart after Claire disappeared. You stopped caring whether you lived or died. I was trying to save you. Claire's eyes filled again hearing that. Ethan had suffered too, more than she ever allowed herself to imagine. Vanessa grabbed Ethan's arm carefully. I stayed when everyone else walked away. Ethan slowly pulled his arm free. You stayed because you helped destroy my life. The words landed with brutal finality. Richard stepped forward angrily. Careful, Ethan. Coal holding still depends on my board support. Ethan turned toward him without hesitation. Then take your support and leave. Gasps spread instantly through the ballroom. Richard's face darkened. You would destroy your company over this woman. Ethan looked at Claire standing alone in the center of the shattered wedding aisle. Her damp hair. Her trembling hands. The wedding ring still on her finger after 18 months of believing he abandoned her. His voice lowered almost to a whisper. She is not this woman. He swallowed hard. She is my wife. Claire closed her eyes briefly as emotion crashed through her chest all over again. For the first time since arriving at the ballroom, she finally believed him. Ethan never stopped loving her. And suddenly that truth hurt far more than the lies. The ballroom slowly began emptying, but nobody left quietly. Reporters rushed toward the exits, making frantic phone calls while guests whispered behind trembling champagne glasses. Somewhere in the distance, the string quartet awkwardly packed away their instruments as if they were escaping a disaster. But Ethan barely noticed any of it. He stood near the shattered altar staring at the stack of letters in his hands like they might suddenly disappear too. Claire remained several feet away beside one of the tall cathedral windows. Rain rolled down the glass behind her in silver streams, blurring the Manhattan skyline into something soft and distant. For 18 months, she had imagined this moment differently. She imagined screaming at Ethan, hating him, walking away from him forever. Instead, she felt exhausted, emotionally hollow, because the truth was somehow worse than betrayal. They had loved each other the entire time, and somebody stole those years anyway. Ethan slowly untied the faded blue ribbon around the letters. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the first envelope. Claire immediately looked away. "Do not," she whispered softly. Ethan glanced up. "Why?" Claire swallowed hard. "Because I wrote those for the man I thought abandoned me." Silence stretched painfully between them. Ethan lowered his eyes back to the page. The paper shook in his hands as he read the first lines. "Ethan, today I walked 10 steps without assistance. You would have laughed because I cried after step number 3. I still hear your voice in my head every night telling me not to quit." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. His chest tightened so sharply it almost hurt to breathe. Claire watched him carefully from across the room. "I stopped writing after month 8, she admitted quietly. "I thought you stopped caring." Ethan looked up instantly. "Never." His answer came too fast, too honestly. Claire felt tears gathering again despite fighting them back all night. Ethan opened another letter, then another. Every page carried pieces of the life they lost. Claire describing physical therapy sessions, lonely birthdays in Italy, small cafes she visited while relearning how to exist after the accident. Some letters were angry, others heartbreaking, but every single one ended the same way. "I still love you." Ethan suddenly sat down heavily on the edge of the empty front pew, like the emotional weight inside those envelopes had finally become too much to carry standing up. Claire noticed his shoulders trembling slightly. The billionaire who terrified boardrooms and dominated financial headlines looked completely broken now. Ethan stared at one letter longer than the others. "You kept wearing your ring," he whispered. Claire instinctively looked down at her left hand. The platinum band still rested there beneath the ballroom lights. "I tried taking it off once," she admitted softly. "I could not do it." Ethan let out a shaky breath that almost sounded like pain. "Neither could I." Claire's eyes slowly drifted toward his hand. His ring was still there too. After everything, every lie, every funeral, every sleepless night. Ethan suddenly stood and crossed the distance between them carefully, like he was approaching something fragile. Claire's heartbeat quickened instantly. He stopped inches away from her, close enough now that she could see the exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. "Claire," he said quietly, "look at me." She hesitated before finally meeting his gaze. Ethan swallowed hard. "I need you to believe one thing tonight." Claire did not speak. Ethan's voice cracked softly. "I never stopped searching for you." The pain in his eyes looked so real that Claire felt the last pieces of her anger beginning to break apart against her will. But before she could answer, Ethan's phone suddenly began vibrating violently in his pocket. He frowned and pulled it out. The screen filled instantly with emergency alerts. Coal holdings stock crashing. Federal inquiries opening against Hale International. Media leaks exploding across every financial network in America. Ethan stared at the screen silently. Then his face slowly darkened, because he realized this nightmare was only beginning. By sunrise the next morning, every major news network in America was talking about Ethan Cole's destroyed wedding. Footage of Claire walking through the ballroom in her rain-soaked coat played repeatedly across giant screens in Times Square. Headlines called it the scandal of the year. The billionaire groom, the dead wife, the missing letters, the mysterious connection to Hale International. But inside the penthouse office of Cole Holdings, nobody cared about headlines anymore. They cared about survival. Ethan stood silently near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan while financial analysts argued around the conference table behind him. The stock dropped 19% overnight. Investors are panicking. Hale International is denying all accusations publicly. Ethan barely heard them. His mind was somewhere else entirely. Claire. The letters. 18 stolen months. Across the room, his legal advisor lowered his voice carefully. Federal investigators contacted us this morning. Ethan finally turned. About what? Possible fraud, unlawful medical confinement, and financial conspiracy involving Richard Hale. Silence filled the room instantly. Ethan's jaw tightened. He should have felt victorious hearing that. Instead, he felt exhausted. Because none of this gave him back the nights Claire cried alone believing he abandoned her. A quiet knock interrupted the meeting. Everyone looked toward the glass doors as Claire slowly stepped inside, wearing a simple cream sweater and dark jeans borrowed from one of Ethan's staff assistants. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman from old magazine photos. She looked human, fragile, real. The entire room immediately fell silent. Ethan stared at her for a second before dismissing everyone without hesitation. Within moments, the massive conference room emptied completely, leaving only the two of them standing beneath the gray morning skyline. Claire crossed her arms nervously. I should not be here. Ethan stepped closer slowly. I am glad you are. Her eyes softened briefly before pain returned again. Your company is collapsing because of me. Ethan shook his head immediately. No, it is collapsing because I trusted the wrong people. Claire lowered her gaze. I almost became one of them. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? Claire hesitated before answering. 3 months ago, Richard Hale offered me money to disappear permanently. Ethan's expression darkened instantly. How much? Claire let out a bitter laugh. Enough to buy silence. Ethan looked physically ill hearing it. Claire walked slowly toward the conference table and placed down a thin envelope. I recorded the conversation. Ethan stared at her in shock. Claire's eyes filled with quiet emotion. I stopped being helpless a long time ago, Ethan. For the first time since the ballroom, Ethan saw something different in her. Strength. The woman standing before him was not broken anymore. She survived. Alone. Ethan picked up the envelope carefully. Inside was a flash drive and signed documents connected to offshore accounts. Enough evidence to destroy Richard Hale permanently. Ethan looked at Claire slowly. You could have sold this to the media. Claire gave him a tired smile. I did not come back for revenge. Her voice softened painfully. I came back because part of me still hoped my husband was not the man they told me he was. Ethan felt something inside him crack all over again. Before he could respond, the conference room television suddenly flashed with breaking news. Richard Hale was holding a live press conference downtown. The screen switched to Richard standing behind microphones surrounded by reporters. His expression looked cold, calculated, dangerous. The accusations against my family are entirely fabricated, he announced confidently. Then his eyes hardened slightly. And unfortunately, Ethan Cole's unstable wife has manipulated him during a vulnerable emotional period. Claire froze. Ethan's face darkened instantly. But Richard was not finished. If necessary, he continued calmly. I will release private medical evaluations proving Claire Bennett Cole is psychologically unreliable. Claire's face lost all color. Because suddenly she realized something horrifying. Richard Hale was preparing to destroy her publicly. Claire stood motionless in front of the conference room television while Richard Hale continued speaking calmly to the press like a man completely certain he would win. Miss Bennett suffered severe trauma overseas, he explained smoothly. Sadly, her condition has caused emotional confusion and paranoid delusions. Reporters immediately began shouting questions. Ethan muted the television without looking away from the screen. The silence afterward felt heavier than the noise. Claire wrapped her arms tightly around herself, trying to steady her breathing. This is exactly why I stayed away, she whispered. Ethan turned toward her instantly. Claire. She shook her head before he could continue. You do not understand how powerful men like Richard operate. Her voice trembled slightly now. They do not just destroy your reputation. They destroy reality around you until nobody knows what truth even looks like anymore. Ethan walked toward her slowly. I believe you. Claire gave a weak laugh, filled with exhaustion. Right now you do. Her eyes finally met his. But what happens when every network in America starts calling me unstable? Ethan stopped directly in front of her. Then I stand beside you while they do it. Claire's expression faltered for a second because his answer came without hesitation. Ethan looked down briefly before speaking again. I failed you once already. His voice lowered. I will not fail you again. The sincerity in his eyes almost broke her completely. For 18 months, she survived by convincing herself Ethan stopped loving her. It was easier than believing fate could be this cruel. But standing in front of him now felt dangerous because the man she loved was still there beneath all the grief and anger. Ethan suddenly reached into his suit pocket and carefully pulled something out. Claire's breath caught instantly. It was a tiny folded receipt faded almost white with age. Ethan opened it slowly between them. 2 cups of coffee. Brooklyn Art Cafe. 6 years earlier. Claire stared at it speechless. Ethan gave a sad smile. You told me successful people never keep sentimental things. Claire remembered saying that during their 3rd date, while teasing him about his overorganized wallet. Ethan looked down at the old receipt softly. I kept this anyway. Claire felt tears burning behind her eyes again. Ethan swallowed hard before continuing. I thought if I threw it away, he paused painfully, then losing you would become real. Claire looked away quickly before he could see her cry. The room fell quiet except for distant thunder rolling across Manhattan outside. Then Ethan's phone rang sharply again. His legal advisor. Ethan answered immediately. What happened? He listened silently for several seconds before his entire expression changed. When Claire watched fear spread across his face for the first time since the ballroom. Ethan ended the call slowly. Richard Hale just filed an emergency injunction against you. Claire frowned in confusion. For what? Ethan looked furious now. He is requesting the court place you under psychiatric evaluation before you testify publicly. Claire went completely pale. No. Ethan moved closer instantly. Listen to me. This is intimidation. But Claire was already shaking her head. You do not understand. Her breathing became uneven. If they label me unstable, every statement I make becomes worthless. Ethan grabbed her hands gently before panic could fully consume her. Claire, look at me. She finally lifted her eyes toward him. Ethan's voice became steady. Certain. Then we stop hiding. Claire stared at him silently. Ethan tightened his grip carefully around her trembling hands. Richard thinks fear will isolate you again. His eyes darkened with determination. This time we expose everything before he can bury the truth. Claire's heartbeat quickened. How? Ethan looked toward the giant conference room television where financial networks still displayed headlines about the wedding scandal. Then he turned back to her slowly. Tomorrow morning, he said quietly, you and I are holding a live press conference together. By 9 o'clock the next morning, every camera in New York seemed aimed at the front steps of Cole Holdings. Satellite trucks lined the streets for blocks while reporters crowded behind barricades shouting questions over one another. Some wanted answers about the wedding scandal. Others wanted confirmation that Claire Bennett Cole was mentally unstable. But inside the building, Claire stood frozen beside a conference room mirror trying to steady her breathing. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his dark navy suit nearby, watching her carefully without pressuring her to speak. Claire looked pale, not weak, just emotionally exhausted after carrying 18 months of grief alone. We can still cancel this, Ethan said. Softly, Claire gave a small tired smile. You hate losing battles, remember? Ethan stepped closer. This is not a battle to me. His eyes softened. It is you. Claire looked away before emotion could fully break through again. Somewhere downstairs, reporters suddenly erupted louder as Richard Hale arrived surrounded by attorneys and security guards. The press conference was about to become a war. 10 minutes later, Ethan and Claire stepped onto the stage together beneath blinding camera flashes. The room instantly exploded with questions. Claire, were you hospitalized for psychological instability? Mr. Cole, did you knowingly conceal your wife's survival? Is Hale International suing your company? Ethan reached for Claire's hand beneath the table before speaking into the microphone calmly. My wife is not unstable. The room quieted immediately. Ethan continued steadily. She survived a traumatic accident, isolation, and systematic manipulation by people who wanted control over my company and my personal life. Reporters scribbled furiously. Across the room, Richard Hale watched with cold fury beside Vanessa, who looked emotionally shattered and exhausted. Claire swallowed hard before leaning toward the microphone herself. Her voice trembled slightly at first. For a long time, I believed nobody would ever believe me. The room fell silent listening to her. Claire took a breath. I thought love disappeared when things became difficult. Her eyes drifted briefly toward Ethan beside her. I was wrong. Ethan looked at her quietly, almost unable to breathe hearing those words. Claire slowly held up one of the unopened letters. I wrote 217 letters to my husband while recovering overseas. She paused carefully. None of them reached him. Shocked murmurs spread instantly across the room. Claire then revealed the flash drive containing payment records, intercepted correspondence, and recordings connected to Hale International. Federal agents standing near the back of the room immediately stepped forward toward Richard Hale. Vanessa lowered her head silently as investigators approached her father. Richard tried speaking, but cameras were already capturing everything. The empire he built through manipulation was collapsing in real time. But Claire barely looked at him anymore. Because for the first time in almost 2 years, she finally felt free. Hours later, the storm over Manhattan finally cleared. The city glowed gold beneath sunset as Ethan stood quietly on the rooftop terrace of Cole Holdings waiting for Claire. When she stepped outside, wind gently lifted strands of her blonde hair across her face. Neither spoke for several seconds. The silence between them no longer felt painful. Ethan slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the faded coffee receipt from Brooklyn. Then he placed it carefully beside the blue ribbon that once held her letters together. "I spent 18 months trying to survive losing you," he said softly. Claire's eyes filled instantly. Ethan swallowed hard. "But loving you was still the easiest thing I ever did." Claire let out a trembling laugh through tears before stepping closer to him. "You really kept the receipt this entire time?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You kept the ring." For the first time since walking into that ballroom, Claire finally smiled back completely. Real, warm, alive. Manhattan lights flickered below them while Ethan gently rested his forehead against hers. No cameras, no billion-dollar deals, no lies. Just two people who almost lost each other forever. And somewhere inside the quiet sunset above the city, both of them realized the same thing at exactly the same time. Love had survived everything meant to destroy it.